The deafening thunder of hooves shook the earth beneath Willow Rawson's feet as she realized, with a heart-stopping jolt of terror, that she had wandered directly into the path of a cattle stampede. Montana Territory, 1876, was unforgiving to those who made such fatal mistakes, and as the massive wall of longhorns charged toward her across the open plain outside of Wichita, Kansas, Willow knew she might not live to see another sunset. "Dear God," she whispered, her legs suddenly leaden and unresponsive as the dust cloud swelled before her. The ground trembled violently, and the bellowing of the frightened steers filled her ears. Her basket of gathered wildflowers dropped forgotten to the ground as she finally managed to turn, but her skirts tangled around her legs as she tried to run. The herd was gaining. Hundreds of animals driven by blind panic, their horns glinting in the afternoon sun. Willow stumbled, fell to one knee, and in that moment knew with absolute clarity that she was going to die. Then came the thundering of different hooves, a single horse, pushing hard. Through her terror, she was dimly aware of a rider breaking away from the edge of the stampede, driving his horse directly toward her at breakneck speed. The cowboy leaned low over his mount's neck, his face set with determination beneath the brim of his hat. "Take my hand," he shouted as he drew alongside her, extending his arm down while masterfully controlling his horse with his knees and one hand on the reins. Willow reached up without hesitation, and with surprising strength, the cowboy swept her off the ground and onto his horse in one fluid motion, settling her sideways in front of him. His arm locked around her waist as he wheeled the horse sharply, the animal's muscles bunching beneath them as it leaped forward, racing away from the stampeding cattle. "Hold on tight," he commanded, his voice close to her ear as they rode hard across the prairie. The horse's powerful strides gradually putting distance between them and certain death. Willow clung to the stranger, her heart hammering against her ribs as they finally slowed to a stop on a small rise, well clear of the danger. The herd continued its thunderous path across the plains, a moving river of horn and hide now veering away from where they had been. Only when they were truly safe did Willow dare to look up at her rescuer. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin, sharp blue eyes, and a strong jawline shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. His worn leather vest bore the distinctive mark of the Circle T Ranch. "Thank you," she managed to say through trembling lips. "You saved my life, mister." "Flint, Forrest Linden," he replied, his voice a pleasant baritone now that he wasn't shouting over the noise of a stampede. "And you're welcome, Miss Rawson, Willow Rawson." She became acutely aware of his arm still around her waist and the intimacy of their position. Despite the lingering fear, she felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "Miss Rawson," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "You picked a mighty dangerous place for a stroll today." "I wasn't strolling," she corrected, finding her voice again as her composure gradually returned. "I was collecting wildflowers for my aunt's apothecary. I never heard the cattle coming until it was too late." Forrest's expression softened. "Well, regardless, you're safe now. Let me take you home before your family starts to worry." He adjusted his hold on her, ensuring she was secure before gently turning his horse toward town. As they rode, Willow became increasingly conscious of his solid presence behind her, the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back, and the strength in the arm that held her. "You new to Wichita?" he asked conversationally as they traversed the rolling prairie. "I don't believe I've seen you around before." "My aunt and I arrived 2 weeks ago from Boston," Willow explained. "My uncle passed away last winter and Aunt Harriet couldn't maintain the apothecary shop alone. She wrote to me and I came to help." Forrest nodded thoughtfully. "I know the place. Corner of Main and 3rd, right? Passed by it just yesterday. Boston's a long way from Kansas." "It is," Willow agreed, thinking of the refined city life she'd left behind. "Everything here is bigger. The sky, the land, Even the dangers, she added with a nervous laugh, glancing back toward where the cattle had now disappeared over the horizon. And the opportunities, Forrest added. That's why folks keep coming west, to build something of their own. As they approached the outskirts of Wichita, Willow felt an unexpected reluctance to end this encounter. There was something about Forrest Linden that intrigued her beyond the fact that he'd just saved her life. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence he exuded, or the gentle way he handled his horse, but she found herself wanting to know more about him. "There it is," she said, as the buildings of Wichita came into view. The town had grown rapidly since becoming a shipping point for Texas cattle drives, with new businesses and homes spreading outward from the original settlement. "I'll take you straight to your aunt's shop," Forrest said, guiding his horse down the main thoroughfare. People turned to look as they rode by a young woman perched in front of a cowboy, was bound to raise eyebrows in a town where propriety was still valued, if somewhat loosely. Willow felt her cheeks grow warm again, but Forrest seemed unconcerned with the attention. When they reached Rawson's apothecary, Forrest dismounted first and then reached up to help Willow down. His hands spanned her waist easily as he lifted her from the saddle, and for a brief moment when her feet touched the ground, they stood close enough that she could see flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Thank you again, Mr. Linden," she said, taking a small step back. "I don't know how I can repay you." "No need for repayment, Miss Rawson," he replied with a slight smile that transformed his serious face. "Just be more mindful of where you're gathering those flowers next time." The door to the apothecary swung open, and Harriet Rawson appeared, her expression shifting rapidly from concern to relief at the sight of her niece. "Willow, I was beginning to worry," she said, her gaze moving curiously between her niece and the tall cowboy. "Aunt Harriet, this is Mr. Forrest Linden," Willow explained quickly. He rescued me from a rather dangerous situation today." Before she could elaborate, a voice called from down the street. "Linden, we've been looking all over for you." Forrest turned to see another cowboy approaching on horseback. "That's my foreman," he explained to Willow. "I should go. The rest of the cattle need to be rounded up and accounted for." "Of course," Willow nodded, suddenly feeling awkward. "Thank you again." Forrest tipped his hat to both women. "Madam," he acknowledged Harriet respectfully before turning his attention back to Willow. "Miss Rawson, it was my pleasure." With that, he swung back into his saddle and rode off to join his fellow cowhand, leaving Willow staring after him, her heart still beating a little faster than normal. "Well," Aunt Harriet said with undisguised curiosity, "I believe you have quite a story to tell me, dear." Willow allowed herself to be led inside the shop, but her thoughts remained with the blue-eyed cowboy who had swept her onto his horse, and quite possibly into something she hadn't been looking for when she'd set out to gather wildflowers that morning. Over the next few days, Willow found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to Forrest Linden. She tried to focus on her work at the apothecary measuring herbs, preparing tinctures, and assisting customers, but the memory of those intense blue eyes and strong arms kept intruding. "You're mixing lavender with sage again," Aunt Harriet observed one afternoon, gently taking the mortar from Willow's hands. "That's the second time today. I dare say your mind is elsewhere," Willow sighed, tucking a stray lock of chestnut hair behind her ear. "I'm sorry, Aunt, I'll be more careful." "It wouldn't have anything to do with that handsome cowboy who brought you home, would it?" Harriet asked with a knowing smile. At 52, she had the wisdom of experience, but maintained a youthful spirit that made her easy to confide in. "I barely know him," Willow protested, though she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach whenever she thought of him. "Sometimes that's how it begins," Harriet replied cryptically, returning to her inventory list. The bell above the shop door jingled, and both women looked up. Willow's heart leaped when she recognized Forrest's tall frame filling the doorway, though she quickly composed herself. He'd removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Mr. Linden," she greeted him, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "What brings you to our shop?" Forrest cleared his throat. "Miss Rawson, Mrs. Rawson," he nodded to each of them. "I find myself in need of something for sunburn. Some of the younger hands aren't used to working cattle drives yet." "Of course," Harriet replied warmly. "Willow has just prepared a fresh batch of aloe and calendula salve. It works wonders for burns of all kinds." Willow moved to the shelves behind the counter and selected a small clay jar. "Apply it twice daily," she instructed, wrapping the container in brown paper. "It should bring relief within a day or two." Their fingers brushed as she handed him the package, and Willow felt that same spark she'd experienced when he'd helped her down from his horse. "Much obliged," he said, his eyes lingering on hers. "How have you been since our encounter?" "Well, thank you," she replied. "No more walks near cattle herds, I promise." He smiled at that, and Willow noticed how it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners pleasantly. "Glad to hear it, though I'd be happy to come to your rescue again if needed." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Harriet, with the intuition of a woman who recognized the beginnings of something special, discreetly moved to the back room, muttering about checking on a brewing tonic. "Actually," Forrest continued once they were relatively alone, "I was wondering if you might allow me to call on you properly. Perhaps this Sunday afternoon, there's a social at the church, and I thought if you're not otherwise engaged." "I'm not," Willow said, perhaps too quickly. She took a breath and tried again. "I mean, I would enjoy that very much, Mr. Linden." "Forrest, please," he insisted softly. "Forrest," she repeated, liking the feel of his name on her lips. He paid for the salve, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sunday, then." "I'll come by around noon, if that suits you." "It does." With a final nod, he replaced his hat and departed, leaving Willow with a smile she couldn't suppress. Harriet reappeared almost immediately. My, she said with amusement. "I believe the young man has taken a fancy to you, dear." "Aunt Harriet," Willow protested weakly, but she couldn't deny the happiness bubbling up inside her. Sunday couldn't arrive quickly enough. When Sunday finally came, Willow spent more time than usual preparing for the church social. She wore her best dress, a pale blue cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, and arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. "You look lovely," Aunt Harriet assured her as they waited in the sitting room above the shop. "Like a breath of fresh air." Precisely at noon, there was a knock at the door. Harriet answered it, ushering in Forrest, who was dressed in clean clothes that, while simple, clearly represented his best. He'd trimmed his stubble and slicked back his hair, and in his hand was a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Miss Rawson," he greeted Willow, his eyes appreciative as they took in her appearance. "These are for you. I made sure to gather them from a safe location," he added with a smile. Willow accepted the flowers, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you, they're beautiful." "Not half as beautiful as you," he replied quietly. Harriet beamed at the pair. "You two run along and enjoy yourselves. I'll be joining the social a bit later with Mrs. Peterson from next door." The walk to the church was filled with pleasant conversation. Forrest told her about growing up in Missouri before heading further west at 18 to make his fortune. "And have you? Made your fortune, I mean?" Willow asked curiously. "Not yet," he admitted. "But I'm working on it. Started as a regular hand on the Circle T, but I've been saving every penny. One day, I aim to have my own spread." There was determination in his voice that Willow admired. Having grown up in a comfortable middle-class home in Boston, she appreciated his ambition and work ethic. "What about you?" he asked as they approached the white-painted church where tables had been set up in the yard for the social. "Did you leave anyone special back in Boston?" The question was posed casually, but Willow detected genuine interest behind it. "No," she answered honestly. "There were a few gentlemen callers, but no one." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "No one who made me feel like staying." Forrest's eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. The church social was lively, with most of Wichita's residents in attendance. There was food, music, and dancing. with children running about playing games while adults conversed in groups. Willow was introduced to so many people she doubted she'd remember half their names, but everyone was welcoming. "Folks here are curious about newcomers," Forrest explained as they sat together, enjoying slices of apple pie. "But once they accept you, they're loyal as can be." "It's very different from Boston," Willow observed. "There, people can live next door to each other for years and barely exchange more than pleasantries." Forrest shook his head. "Out here, neighbors depend on each other. It's the only way to survive." As the afternoon progressed, Willow found herself genuinely enjoying Forrest's company. He was thoughtful and intelligent, with a quiet confidence that wasn't arrogance. When the fiddlers struck up a lively tune, he extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. Willow had never been much of a dancer, but she placed her hand in his without hesitation. "I should warn you, I may step on your toes." "I'll risk it," he grinned, leading her to where other couples were gathering. The dance was energetic, and Willow was breathless with laughter by the end of it. Forrest was a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her with gentle pressure on her waist and hand. When the music slowed for a more intimate waltz, he held her a respectable distance away, but Willow was acutely aware of his warmth and the strength in his arms. "You're doing just fine," he murmured encouragingly when she momentarily lost the rhythm. "Just follow my lead." As they moved together, Willow realized she was doing exactly that, following his lead into feelings she hadn't expected to develop so quickly. Later, as the sun began to set and the social wound down, Forrest escorted Willow and her aunt back to their home above the apothecary. "I have to head back to the ranch tonight," he explained as they stood on the porch. "We're moving the herd to summer pastures tomorrow." Willow tried not to let her disappointment show. "How long will you be gone?" "About a week, if all goes well," he answered. "But I'd like to call on you again when I return, if I may." "I'd like that," she replied sincerely. He took her hand and, with perfect gentlemanly manners, raised it to his lips for a brief kiss. "Until then, Miss Rawson." The week that followed was the longest of Willow's life. She threw herself into her work at the apothecary, learning everything she could from her aunt and taking on more responsibilities. The shop was becoming busier as word spread of Harriet's skill with herbal remedies and Willow's gentle bedside manner when treating minor ailments. "You have a gift," Harriet told her one evening as they closed up shop. "Your uncle would have been proud to see how quickly you've learned." Willow smiled, touched by the compliment. "I enjoy the work more than I expected to. In Boston, I never thought I'd find fulfillment in something so practical." "And what of Mr. Linden?" Harriet asked with characteristic directness. "Do you find fulfillment in his company as well?" Willow busied herself with arranging jars on a shelf. "He's a good man, from what I can tell." "He is," Harriet agreed. "I've asked around town. People speak highly of him. Hard-working, honest, and according to Mrs. Sullivan at the general store, one of the few cowboys who doesn't drink away his wages at the saloon." "Aunt Harriet," Willow exclaimed, both embarrassed and amused by her aunt's investigations. "You shouldn't be gossiping about him." "It's not gossip if it's all positive," Harriet replied with a wink. "Besides, you're my only niece. It's my duty to ensure any potential suitor is worthy of you." Willow's cheeks flushed at the word suitor, but she couldn't deny that's what Forrest was quickly becoming. On the 8th day after the social, the bell above the shop door jingled, and Willow looked up from her work to see Forrest standing there. He appeared tired but happy to see her, his hat in his hands. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Promised I would be," he replied with a smile that reached his eyes. "How have you been, Miss Rawson?" "Well enough," she answered, suddenly shy under his gaze. "And you? Did the cattle drive go smoothly?" "As smooth as these things ever go," he said with a slight shrug. "Lost a few head in a ravine, but most made it to the high pastures without incident." They stood looking at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Forrest broke the silence. I was wondering if you might join me for dinner tomorrow evening at the hotel restaurant. It's not fancy like what you might be used to in Boston, but they serve a decent meal." "I'd be delighted," Willow replied without hesitation. 6 o'clock? Perfect." He nodded, seemingly pleased but uncertain what to do next. "Well, I should let you get back to your work. I just wanted to." He trailed off, then finished simply, "I wanted to see you." The honesty of his statement touched Willow deeply. "I'm glad you did." With a tip of his hat, Forrest departed, but the warmth of his presence lingered long after he'd gone. The next evening, dressed in her second-best gown, a rose-colored creation with modest lace trim, Willow waited nervously for Forrest's arrival. Aunt Harriet had helped her arrange her hair in a becoming style, with soft tendrils framing her face. "Remember," Harriet advised as they heard footsteps on the stairs, "a lady can be both proper and engaging. Don't be afraid to share your thoughts with him." Forrest arrived precisely on time, looking handsome in a clean shirt, vest, and the only pair of trousers he owned that weren't meant for riding. He offered his arm to Willow, and they set off toward the Wichita Hotel. The restaurant, while simple by Eastern standards, was the finest establishment in town. The maitre d' led them to a table set with clean linens and actual silverware, a luxury in a town where many still ate with whatever utensils they carried with them. "I hope this meets with your approval," Forrest said as he held her chair for her. "I know it's not what you're accustomed to." "It's lovely," Willow assured him, touched by his consideration of her background. "Besides, I'm quickly becoming accustomed to Wichita's ways." Over a meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, they talked easily about their lives and aspirations. Forrest spoke of his dream to own land, to build a ranch where he could raise both cattle and horses. "I've got my eye on a parcel north of here," he explained, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "Good water access, decent grazing land. The owner might be willing to sell next year if I can save enough for a down payment." "It sounds wonderful," Willow said sincerely, captivated by his passion. "You'll make it happen, I'm sure of it." "What about you?" he asked. "What are your dreams, Willow?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and she felt a pleasant warmth spread through her at the sound of it on his lips. "I never really thought beyond helping my parents and then my aunt," she admitted. "In Boston, women of my standing were expected to marry well and maintain a household. Out here—" She looked around the restaurant, at the diverse mix of people carving out lives for themselves. "Out here, it seems like there are more possibilities." "There are," Forrest agreed. "The West isn't as bound by tradition. A person can remake themselves here if they've got the courage for it." As they finished their meal, and Forrest paid the bill, Willow felt a growing certainty that her life had changed irrevocably the moment he'd swept her onto his horse. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Outside, the evening air was cool and pleasant. Stars dotted the vast Kansas sky, more visible here than they'd ever been in Boston with its gas lamps and crowded buildings. "Would you like to walk for a while?" Forrest asked, offering his arm again. "It's a beautiful night," Willow nodded, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. They strolled through the quieter streets of Wichita, their conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. When they reached a small park near the center of town, they paused by a bench beneath a large oak tree. "May I?" Forrest gestured to the bench, and when Willow nodded, they sat side by side, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I've been thinking about you every day since we met," Forrest said suddenly, his voice low and sincere. "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never felt this way about anyone before." Willow's heart raced at his words. "I've thought about you too," she confessed, "more than I probably should." He turned slightly to face her, his expression earnest in the moonlight. "I'm not a wealthy man, Willow. I can't offer you the kind of life you had in Boston, but I'm working toward something better, and He hesitated, then continued with determination. "I'd like you to be part of that future if you're willing." "Are you courting me, Forrest Linden?" Willow asked softly, hardly daring to believe this was happening. "I'm trying to," he replied with a small smile. "Am I doing a poor job of it?" "No," she whispered. "You're doing just fine." Their eyes held for a long moment, and then, with infinite gentleness, Forrest leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise of things to come. When they parted, Willow knew with absolute certainty that her life had found a new direction, one that led wherever Forrest Linden would go over the next few months. Forrest courted Willow with the same dedication he applied to everything in his life. When his duties at the ranch allowed, he would come to town to see her, sometimes just for an hour or two, other times for an entire day when he could manage it. They walked together through town, attended church socials, and occasionally shared meals at the hotel restaurant. Forrest even accompanied Willow on her wildflower gathering expeditions, though he was careful to scout the area for cattle herds first, a precaution that always made her laugh and blush at the memory of their first meeting. Aunt Harriet observed their growing attachment with approval, though she maintained a proper chaperone's vigilance. "Young love needs room to blossom, but also boundaries," she told Willow one evening after Forrest had left. "He respects those boundaries, which speaks well of his character." Summer gave way to autumn, and the prairie around Wichita transformed from lush green to golden brown. The cattle drives became less frequent as ranchers prepared for winter, giving Forrest more time in town. He used some of that time to help Willow and Harriet prepare the apothecary for the colder months, repairing loose boards, checking the roof for leaks, and ensuring the stove was in good working order. "You're quite handy," Willow observed as she watched him fix a sticky drawer behind the counter. "Is there anything you can't do?" "Dance the quadrille without stepping on toes," he replied with a grin. "And apparently stay away from you for more than a few days at a time." His frankness still made her blush, but she was growing more comfortable with his expressions of affection. In private moments, with Aunt Harriet discreetly in another room, they shared kisses that grew increasingly tender and meaningful. One crisp October afternoon, Forrest arrived at the apothecary with unusual excitement in his eyes. "Get your coat," he told Willow. "I have something to show you." Curious, Willow complied, wrapping herself in a warm woolen coat against the autumn chill. Outside, Forrest's horse was hitched alongside a small buggy he'd borrowed from the livery stable. "Where are we going?" she asked as he helped her into the buggy. "You'll see," he replied mysteriously, taking the reins. They drove north out of Wichita for about an hour, the prairie stretching around them in all directions. Finally, Forrest turned the buggy onto a rutted track that led to a rise overlooking a small creek. At the top of the rise, he stopped and helped Willow down. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with pride as he gestured to the land before them. 160 acres with water rights to the creek. I made the first payment last week." Willow's eyes widened as she realized what he was saying. "You bought the land you told me about. Forrest, that's wonderful," he nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. "It's not much yet, just land, but come spring, I'll start building. A house first, then corrals and barns." "Your dream," she said softly, understanding how much this meant to him. "Part of it," he agreed, taking her hands in his. "Willow, I didn't just bring you out here to show you the land. I brought you here because I want you to see what could be our future, if you want it to be." Her heart began to race as he dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "I love you, Willow Rawson. I've loved you since the moment I pulled you onto my horse, though I didn't know it then. I want to build a life with you right here if you'll have me. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Willow's eyes, but they were tears of joy. The answer had been forming in her heart for months, waiting only for him to ask. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Forrest, I will marry you." He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling, Forrest reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple silver ring. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slid it onto her finger. It's not fancy, but it's perfect, Willow interrupted, admiring how it caught the autumn sunlight. Absolutely perfect. They stood together on what would be their land, looking out over the rolling prairie, and Willow felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This place, so different from the busy streets of Boston, would be her home. With Forrest at her side, she would build a new life here, a life she'd never imagined, but now couldn't picture any other way. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Wichita. Harriet was overjoyed, having grown fond of Forrest during his frequent visits to the apothecary. The townspeople, too, seemed pleased by the match between the respected young cowboy and the Eastern lady who had adapted so well to frontier life. Spring wedding, Harriet suggested as they discussed plans over supper that evening, with Forrest joining them at their table above the shop. Willow looked to Forrest questioningly. Is that too soon? You mentioned building in the spring. I can do both, he assured her with confidence. The house won't be grand at first, but it'll be sturdy and warm. We can add to it over time as our needs grow. The implication of his words that they might have children someday brought a warm flush to Willow's cheeks. Spring it is, then, she agreed, already imagining their life together. Winter descended on Kansas with characteristic harshness. Snow blanketed the prairie, and biting winds howled through Wichita's streets. The apothecary remained busy with customers seeking remedies for winter ailments, and Forrest's duties at the ranch kept him occupied ensuring the cattle survived the harsh conditions. Despite the weather and their responsibilities, they found time for each other. Forrest would sometimes stay in town overnight during particularly bad storms, taking a room at the boarding house rather than risking the journey back to the ranch. On those evenings, he would join Willow and Harriet for supper, and they would spend hours talking by the fire, planning their future together. During one such evening in late January, as a blizzard raged outside, Forrest shared news that would alter their plans. The ranch owners offered me a promotion, he said as they sat in the cozy parlor. Trail boss for the spring drive to Dodge City. Willow's immediate happiness for his achievement was tempered by concern. That's wonderful, but wouldn't that take you away right around our wedding? Forrest nodded grimly. It would, for at least 3 weeks, maybe a month. The pay is excellent enough to finish the house and still have savings left over, but the timing couldn't be worse. Could you delay the wedding? Harriet suggested pragmatically. Or bring it forward, Forrest countered, looking at Willow with a question in his eyes. We could marry before I leave. It would mean you'd be a bride alone for a few weeks, but when I returned, our home would be ready and waiting. Willow considered the options. The thought of being separated so soon after their wedding wasn't ideal, but the practical benefits of Forrest's promotion were undeniable. And bringing the wedding forward meant they would be husband and wife that much sooner. Let's do it, she decided firmly. Let's marry before you leave. I can manage a few weeks on my own, knowing you'll come back to me. Relief and love shone in Forrest's eyes. I'll always come back to you, Willow, no matter what. And so their wedding was hastily rescheduled for late February, giving them just enough time for preparations. Letters were sent to Willow's parents in Boston, though there wasn't enough time for them to make the journey west for the ceremony. Instead, they sent their blessings along with a generous wedding gift to help the young couple establish their home. The weeks leading up to the wedding flew by in a flurry of activity. Between her duties at the apothecary and wedding preparations, Willow barely had time to think. Forrest divided his time between the ranch, where he was preparing for the upcoming cattle drive, and his land, where he worked tirelessly whenever weather permitted to begin construction on their home. You're pushing yourself too hard, Willow chided gently when he arrived one evening looking exhausted. You need to rest. I'll rest when our house has 4 walls and a roof, he replied stubbornly, though he accepted the cup of hot coffee she offered him. Despite the rushed timeline and winter conditions, Their wedding day dawned clear and surprisingly mild for February. The small church in Wichita was filled with well-wishers townspeople who had come to respect both the hard-working cowboy and the kind-hearted apothecary's assistant. Harriet had helped Willow prepare a simple but elegant wedding dress, adapted from one of her better gowns with the addition of lace at the collar and cuffs. With no father present to give her away, Willow was escorted down the aisle by Mr. Peterson, the elderly shopkeeper from next door to the apothecary who had become a friend and father figure to both Rawson women. Forrest waited at the altar, his usual worn work clothes replaced by a new suit purchased specifically for the occasion. When he turned and saw Willow walking toward him, the love and admiration in his eyes made her heart soar. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with both bride and groom speaking their vows clearly and with conviction. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Forrest's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was held at the hotel, with a modest feast and music provided by local musicians. The townspeople congratulated the newlyweds, offering advice and well wishes for their future. "You've found a good one, Mrs." Sullivan from the general store told Willow as they shared a piece of wedding cake. "Most of these cowboys are all swagger and no substance, but your Forrest, he's different." "I know," Willow replied softly, watching her husband across the room as he spoke with some of the ranch hands who had come to celebrate. "I'm very fortunate." Later, as the party continued around them, Forrest led Willow outside for a moment of privacy on the hotel's small veranda. "Mrs. Linden," he said, trying out her new name with a smile. "How does it feel?" "Wonderful," she replied honestly, leaning into his embrace. "Though I'm still getting used to it. We have a lifetime for that," he murmured against her hair. "I just wish we didn't have to part so soon." The reminder of his imminent departure cast a brief shadow over their happiness. In just 3 days, Forrest would leave with the cattle drive, not to return for several weeks. "We'll make the most of the time we have," Willow assured him, raising her face for his kiss. "And then we'll have the rest of our lives together." Their wedding night was spent in the finest room the Wichita Hotel could offer a wedding gift from Aunt Harriet. With tenderness and patience, they discovered each other fully for the first time, their love deepening with this new intimacy. The next 2 days passed in a blur of happiness as they adjusted to their new status as husband and wife. Forrest took Willow to see the progress on their house. The foundation was laid, and the frame was beginning to take shape. It would be a simple structure at first, just 4 rooms, but it would be theirs. "The men from the ranch have promised to continue working on it while I'm gone," Forrest explained as they stood on what would be their front porch. "It won't be finished when I return, but it should be livable." "I can help too," Willow said, already imagining how she would make this house a home. "I may not know much about building, but I can learn." Forrest looked at her with such love it almost overwhelmed her. "You are the most remarkable woman, Willow Linden." The morning of Forrest's departure arrived all too soon. Dawn was just breaking over the eastern horizon as they said their goodbyes outside the apothecary, where Willow would continue to stay with her aunt until the house was ready. "I'll write whenever I can," Forrest promised, holding her close. "And I'll be back before you know it." "Be safe," Willow whispered, fighting back tears. She was determined to send him off with a smile, not wanting him to carry the memory of her crying. "I'll be waiting for you." With a last, lingering kiss, Forrest mounted his horse and rode to join the gathering herd and the other cowboys at the edge of town. Willow watched until he was just a speck on the horizon, then turned back to the reality of life without him for the weeks ahead. The separation proved more difficult than Willow had anticipated. Though she kept busy with her work at the apothecary and regular visits to their land to check on the progress of the house, nights were lonely without Forrest's presence. His letters, when they came, were treasured brief but heartfelt messages about his journey and his longing to return to her. "The house is coming along nicely," she wrote back. Mr. Jensen and the other men have the walls up and the roof nearly complete. I've been planting a small garden out back, hoping it will bloom when you return. Spring gradually transformed the Kansas prairie, bringing with it new growth and promise. The wildflowers that had led Willow into danger the previous year now carpeted the land around their new home, a beautiful reminder of how their story had begun. 4 weeks after his departure, word reached Wichita that the cattle drive was on its way back. Willow's heart lightened with each passing day, knowing that soon Forrest would be home. On a warm afternoon in late March, Willow was at their new house, arranging furniture that had been delivered from the general store. The structure was simple but solid, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a common area. The walls were bare wood, not yet plastered or papered, but to Willow, it was already perfect. She was hanging curtains she had sewn when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking out the window, her heart leaped at the sight of a familiar figure on horseback coming up the path to their home. Rushing outside, Willow couldn't contain her joy as Forrest dismounted and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of weeks of longing. "You're back," she breathed against his neck, inhaling his familiar scent of leather, horse, and the open prairie. "I told you I would be," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. He set her down gently but kept his arms around her waist. "And look at you already making our house a home." "Come see," she urged, taking his hand and leading him inside. "It's not finished, but it's ours." Forrest looked around with approval at what had been accomplished in his absence. "It's perfect," he declared, pulling her close again. "And now that I'm home, we can finish it together." That night, they stayed in their new house for the first time. The bed was simple, the sheets fresh and crisp, and as they lay together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the prairie around them, Willow felt a profound sense of contentment. "I love you, Forrest Linden," she whispered as sleep began to claim them both. "And I love you, Willow Linden," he murmured back, "now and always." Over the months that followed, Forrest and Willow settled into their life together on their small homestead. With the cattle drive behind him and the promotion secured, Forrest was able to negotiate more favorable terms with the ranch owner, allowing him to divide his time between ranch work and developing their own property. Willow continued to help at the apothecary several days a week, riding into town on a gentle mare that Forrest had trained especially for her. The knowledge she gained from her aunt proved invaluable not just in the shop, but also on their homestead, where she cultivated a garden of both vegetables and medicinal herbs. Their home gradually expanded as their needs and resources grew. Forrest added a proper front porch that summer, where they would sit in the evenings watching the sunset over their land. In the fall, he constructed a small barn and corral, bringing home 3 cows and a bull as the beginnings of their own herd. "It's not much," he acknowledged as they watched the animals graze on their land, "but it's a start. Each year we'll add more, and before you know it, we'll have a proper ranch." Willow squeezed his hand, understanding how much this milestone meant to him. "I'm so proud of you, Forrest. You're making your dream come true, step by step." "Our dream now," he corrected her gently. As their first anniversary approached, Willow began to suspect that their family might be growing sooner than they had planned. She kept her suspicions to herself at first, consulting discreetly with Aunt Harriet, who confirmed what Willow already knew in her heart. On the evening of their anniversary, after a special dinner Willow had prepared, she presented Forrest with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" he asked, surprised by the unexpected gift. "Open it," she encouraged, barely containing her excitement. Inside was a tiny pair of hand-knitted baby booties. Forrest stared at them uncomprehendingly for a moment before understanding dawned on his face. "Willow," he whispered, looking up at her with wonder. "Are you?" She nodded, tears of joy filling her eyes. "In the fall. Aunt Harriet thinks late October or early November." Forrest's reaction was everything she had hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy that probably startled the cattle, then gathered her in his arms with a gentleness that belied his excitement. "A baby," he murmured against her hair. "Our baby. Oh, Willow, I don't know if I've ever been so happy." The news of their impending parenthood spurred Forrest to even greater efforts on their homestead. He added another bedroom to the house, improved the roof to ensure it would withstand the coming winter storms, and worked extra shifts at the ranch to save money for the baby's needs. "You're working too hard again," Willow cautioned as summer turned to fall and her pregnancy became more evident. "The baby and I need you healthy and whole." "I just want everything to be perfect for you both," he explained, though he did heed her advice and began pacing himself better. The community rallied around them as the birth approached. Women from town and neighboring farms brought gifts of baby clothes and blankets. Harriet, who had delivered many babies in her years as an apothecary, prepared special teas and tonics for Willow's health and comfort. As Willow's time drew near, Forrest became increasingly anxious, rarely straying far from the house. He arranged for one of the younger ranch hands to handle his duties, ensuring he would be present when his child entered the world. On a crisp November morning, with the first snow of the season dusting the prairie, Willow's labor began. Harriet had come to stay with them for the birth, bringing her knowledge and calm presence to the proceedings. The labor was long and difficult. Through it all, Forrest remained by Willow's side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, and murmuring words of encouragement. His face betrayed his fear, but his voice remained steady, a constant reminder of his love and support. As dawn broke on the second day, their son was born a healthy, robust boy with a shock of dark hair like his father's and his mother's delicate features. "He's perfect," Forrest whispered in awe as he held his son for the first time. "Absolutely perfect." Exhausted but radiant, Willow watched her husband cradle their child with such tenderness it brought tears to her eyes. "What shall we call him?" she asked. Forrest considered for a moment. "William," he suggested, "after your father." The thoughtfulness of his choice touched Willow deeply. "William Frederick Linden," she decided, incorporating Forrest's full first name as well. "Our little Will." In the weeks that followed, they adjusted to life with their newborn son. The house that had seemed so spacious now revolved entirely around this tiny new person. Nights were often sleepless, days filled with the rhythms of feeding, changing, and soothing the baby. "I never knew I could love someone so much," Forrest confessed one night as they stood together over Will's cradle, watching him sleep. "Except you, of course," he added, pressing a kiss to Willow's temple. "It's different but just as powerful," she agreed, leaning into his embrace. "He's the best of both of us." As winter settled over the prairie, the Linden family found themselves cocooned in their warm home, sheltered from the harsh elements outside. The cattle were secured in the barn, provisions were well stocked, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire, Willow nursing the baby while Forrest read aloud from one of the books they had ordered from back east. It wasn't the life Willow had imagined for herself growing up in Boston, but as she looked around at their simple but comfortable home, at her strong, kind husband, and at the perfect baby in her arms, she knew with absolute certainty that it was exactly where she was meant to be. Spring arrived once more, bringing with it new beginnings and growth. Will was now crawling, exploring every corner of the house with a determination that reminded Willow so much of his father. The garden she had planted was thriving, and Forrest's small herd had grown with the addition of several calves. On a beautiful May afternoon, almost 2 years to the day since Forrest had rescued her from the Stampede, they sat on their front porch watching the sunset. Will was asleep in his father's arms, exhausted from a day of discovery and play. "Do you ever think about that day?" Willow asked, her mind drifting back to their first meeting. "When the cattle were charging toward me, and you appeared like some hero from a storybook." Forrest smiled, the memory clearly pleasant for him despite the danger it had posed. "I think about it often, how scared you looked, how light you felt when I pulled you up onto Thunder, How beautiful you were, even covered in dust and terrified for your life. I was so certain I was going to die, she recalled. And then suddenly there you were, reaching down for me. I didn't even hesitate to take your hand. Best decision I ever made, riding toward that stampede instead of away from it, he said softly, shifting Will to a more comfortable position against his chest. Though I admit, at the time I wasn't thinking much beyond getting you out of harm's way. Willow reached over to take his free hand in hers. And now look at us. A home, a family, a future stretching out before us. It's more than I ever dared hope for, Forrest admitted. When I came west, I was just looking for land and opportunity. I never expected to find you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a cultured life in Boston to the wild frontier of Kansas, from a chance encounter during a stampede to this moment of perfect contentment on their own land. I love you, Forrest Linden, she said, the words as true now as the first time she had spoken them. And I love you, Willow Linden, he replied, his blue eyes reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. For saving me right back. With their sleeping sun between them and the vast prairie stretching out around their homestead, they sat together as darkness fell, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else together, with courage, love, and the unshakable bond that had been forged in a moment of danger and had grown stronger with each passing day. In the years that followed, the Linden homestead flourished, much like the family that called it home. By their 5th anniversary, the original 4-room structure had more than doubled in size, with a proper kitchen, a dedicated parlor, and additional bedrooms for their growing family. Will, now 4 years old, had been joined by a sister, Emma Rose, who had her mother's chestnut hair and her father's determined blue eyes. Forrest's cattle operation had expanded steadily, allowing him to leave his position at the Circle T and focus entirely on their own ranch. The Linden L brand was becoming known throughout the territory for quality stock, and each year brought greater success and stability. Willow had continued to develop her knowledge of medicine and healing, becoming known in the area as someone who could be called upon in times of illness or injury. The garden behind their home had grown into an impressive array of medicinal plants and herbs, many of which she dried and prepared for use throughout the year. You should open your own shop in town, Forrest suggested one evening as he watched her carefully label bottles of tincture. With Aunt Harriet getting older, she could use the help, and your remedies are better than most doctors' medicines anyway. Perhaps someday, Willow acknowledged, though her heart was divided between her love of healing and her dedication to their home and children. For now, I'm content to help where I can from here. Aunt Harriet remained a beloved fixture in their lives, visiting regularly from town and doting on her great-niece and nephew. She had taken on a young apprentice at the apothecary, a bright local girl named Sarah, who reminded Willow of herself when she'd first arrived in Wichita. Life on the frontier remained challenging at times. Drought threatened their crops one summer, and harsh winters occasionally isolated them for weeks. But the difficulties only seemed to strengthen the bond between Forrest and Willow, their partnership proving resilient against whatever hardships came their way. On a warm summer evening in 1883, as they celebrated Will's 6th birthday with friends and neighbors gathered at their ranch, Willow found herself standing slightly apart from the festivities, watching her husband organize a game of horseshoes for the children. He's a natural with them, Harriet observed, coming to stand beside her niece. You both are. We've been blessed, Willow agreed, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach, where the first stirrings of their 3rd child had recently made themselves known. She hadn't yet told Forrest, saving the news for a private moment. When I wrote to you all those years ago, asking you to come help an old woman with her shop, I never imagined this would be the result, Harriet said with a soft laugh. But I couldn't be happier for you, dear. Nor I for myself, Willow replied sincerely. Though I still remember how terrified I was that first day on the prairie, everything seemed so vast and wild. And now, Willow looked around at the home they had built, the land they had tamed, the family they had created. Now it's home. I can't imagine being anywhere else. As twilight settled over the celebration, Forrest found his way to Willow's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Linden." "I was just thinking how different my life might have been if I hadn't decided to gather wildflowers that day," she answered, leaning into his embrace. "Or if you hadn't been brave enough to ride toward danger instead of away from it." "I wasn't brave," he corrected her. "Just couldn't bear the thought of someone being hurt if I could prevent it. Had no idea I was riding toward my future wife." Willow turned in his arms, looking up into the face she had come to know better than her own. 7 years had added a few lines around his eyes and strands of silver at his temples, but he was still the handsome cowboy who had swept her onto his horse and into his life. "I have something to tell you," she said softly, taking his hand and placing it gently over her middle. "Come winter, our family will grow again." The joy that spread across Forrest's face was as bright and genuine as it had been the first time she'd shared such news. "Really? Oh, Willow," he whispered, pulling her closer. "Really," she confirmed, smiling up at him. "Are you happy?" "Beyond words," he assured her, his voice rough with emotion. "Each day with you and our children is more than I ever dreamed possible." As the stars began to appear overhead, and their friends and neighbors continued the celebration around them, Forrest and Willow stood together in the moment, savoring the life they had built from that chance encounter during a stampede. The years would bring more changes, more challenges, and more joys. Another son born that winter, the gradual expansion of their ranch, their children growing tall and strong in the freedom of the prairie. Through it all, the love that had sparked between a Boston lady and a Kansas cowboy would continue to deepen and strengthen, a testament to the unexpected ways that destiny can unfold on the wild frontier. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Forrest and Willow would sit together on their porch, watching the stars come out over the land that was theirs, and marvel at how a moment of danger had led to a lifetime of love. "I'd ride into 100 stampedes to find you again," Forrest would say, his hand warm around hers. "And I'd always take your hand," Willow would reply, knowing in her heart that some things were simply meant to be.